If you subject to, that means you are subject. And this is what the prophet kept trying to say. He kept saying, leave that 14th Amendment. See, they have the right to assume that you're a 14th Amendment citizen unless you outrightly proclaim otherwise. That's why the prophet said with us, you must proclaim your Moorish nationality so that they cannot assume that you're a 14th Amendment citizen. All right? So the prophet goes on to say, and he says here, it is a sin for any group of people to violate the national constitutional laws of a free national government and cling to the names and principles that allude to slavery. Names such as Negro, Colored, African, Indian, West Indian, all those allude to slavery because on the books of the states, they denoted property. Those labels denoted property with no rights a white person is bound to respect. So when you call yourself by these names, you are putting yourself in the category of property. And that's what happened with the Dred Scott case. Basically, they told him, they said, Dred Scott, you can't even sue. You can't even come to this court because in your own deposition, you said that you was a Negro descendant of West African, blacks, broad hair, so on and so forth. That was a catchphrase. Once you put yourself in that category, you had no rights that anyone was bound to respect. And see, this whole game that was played with the handful that was brought here from West Africa was designed to enslave us because they used the handful that they brought relatively late in West Africa to justify their fugitive slave law acts. Which, what they was doing was snatching up free brothers and sisters over here and say, you escaped slave that we brought over in West Africa. This was the game that was played. And you even see petitions that were circulated by brothers and sisters back then saying, we against these fugitive slave law acts because you just snatching up free brothers and sisters. Brothers might be rolling down the Mississippi in a canoe or whatever, and you snatch them up saying he's an escaped slave that y'all brought the slave markers over in Africa. This was a game that was played. Why? Because they had to get you out from your rightful name as Moors. Why? Because there were treaties involved. There were international treaties that stated that they could not enslave you if you was a Moor. That's why when you look in the Black Coast of Virginia, it said all these shall be considered slaves except for Moors and Turks and amity. And amity meaning that you have an outstanding treaty of peace and friendship. So they couldn't slave you as Moors. So they had to snatch up your children at birth, switch them up to some other place, and raise them up telling them, oh, you descendants of some Africans that we brought in West Africa. You see what I'm saying? And that did two things. That denied them of their aboriginal rights of being here before Columbus in this hemisphere. And at the same time, it put them in the category of chattel property. All right? So whenever we call ourselves by those names, we put ourselves in that same category. See, the Moors, we deal with science, Moorish science, So if I was to ask you, how do you identify yourself? And if you was to tell me black, I would say, no, that's not an identification of yourself. Black is an adjective. An adjective describes a thing, but it does not identify a thing. And if you say you were black, I would say that was an unscientific or inaccurate description at that because you're not really black. You're various shades of brown. So not only is that description does not identify you, but it's an inaccurate description.